When Ron DeSantis won re-election by a landslide, few predicted that many of his own constituents, staunchly conservative, middle-income families across Florida, would be staring down a financial cliff just 3 years later. But as the ACA subsidies expire and the federal government inches through another shutdown, that's exactly where thousands now find themselves. These are not fringe cases. They're elderly retirees in the villages facing $20,000 health care hikes.
The dollar is falling. The empire is fading. But your voice is rising. Don't just watch history happen. Be part of it. Why have you checkmark subscribe to this channel for more fearless analysis from Richard Wolff and voices the mainstream media refuses to platform?
Working parents in Tampa seeing SNAP benefits vanish overnight, and rural panhandle communities caught between rising costs and disappearing coverage. For a state that voted overwhelmingly red, the consequences of austerity politics are landing hard and fast. This isn't just a policy misstep. It's a systemic unraveling of basic support structures, triggered by a deliberate refusal to fund the programs millions depend on. Florida, once held up as a Republican success story, now illustrates what happens when political ideology collides with lived reality. The expiration of subsidies and collapse of food assistance are poised to hit the same households that helped push these policies into place, creating a backlash that could reshape upcoming elections and leave deep scars on the state's social fabric. So here we are, Florida, Trump's crown jewel, the MAGA stronghold, the state that practically carried him to the last election, is about to get slammed by the very policies pushed by the political movement it helped build. The irony is thick, and the consequences are deadly serious. Because in just a few short weeks, millions of Trump voters across Florida are going to feel the sting of what happens when political performance replaces responsible governance. Let's start with the basics. The United States is facing a brutal double crisis. On one side, food insecurity is surging due to the ongoing government shutdown threatening SNAP benefits. On the other, a healthcare catastrophe is brewing as key subsidies under the Affordable Care Act are set to expire on December 31st, 2025. These aren't theoretical policy debates. They're financial landmines set to detonate directly under the feet of working-class Americans. And Florida, the state that turned out big for Trump, is standing right on the fault line. Let's talk SNAP. With the government shutdown grinding on and Congress refusing to release emergency funds, millions of families are on the verge of losing access to basic food assistance. Yes, a court temporarily blocked the cuts. But let's be honest, this is just a Band-Aid on a gaping wound. The political gridlock in Washington, fed by hardline MAGA Republicans, isn't about fixing problems. It's about scoring points. Meanwhile, real people are being forced to skip meals, ration food, and line up at food banks that are already stretched beyond capacity. Now add the healthcare disaster. The Affordable Care Act subsidies, lifelines that make health insurance even remotely affordable for middle-class and low-income families, are about to vanish. And when they do, premiums are expected to skyrocket. We're talking 50%, 80%, even 114% increases for some families. That's not just inconvenient. That's catastrophic. You've got elderly couples in Florida earning $85,000 a year who will suddenly be hit with $22,600 in annual insurance premiums. That's over a quarter of their income gone, overnight. And for what? Because Washington Republicans decided it was more important to hold the line on austerity than keep their own voters from financial collapse. And here's the kicker. These aren't liberal bastions. These are red states. These are the places that went all in for Trump and Republican leadership, believing the sales pitch that they'd be protected, that they were the real Americans. But now, their reward for that loyalty is a slap in the face. No food assistance, no affordable health care, no plan, no safety net, and no acknowledgement that they're being left behind by the very people they trusted. Let's not forget, this isn't some unfortunate accident. It's a deliberate political calculation. The GOP's refusal to extend ACA subsidies and their stonewalling on emergency SNAP funding aren't about budget concerns. They're about messaging. They want to sell the idea that the government should do less, spend less, and let the free market sort it out. But what they don't say is that in the real world, when the government steps back, regular people pay the price. Not hedge fund CEOs, not the billionaire donors who bankroll MAGA candidates. It's the guys stocking shelves in Tampa, the retired couple in Fort Myers, the single mom working 2 jobs in Orlando. Those are the people absorbing the fallout. What's even more damning is that polling shows many Republicans actually support extending these subsidies. They don't want to lose their coverage. They don't want to see their neighbors go hungry. But Republican leadership, they're not listening. They're locked into this fantasy of rugged individualism and fiscal responsibility that sounds great at a donor retreat, but looks a whole lot different when you're sitting in the ER, deciding whether to get treated or risk a bill you can't pay. And here's where the political blowback begins. Because while GOP operatives may be trying to spin this as necessary belt tightening, the voters aren't buying it, especially not in places like Florida, Texas, and Alabama, states that disproportionately benefit from ACA subsidies and SNAP. These communities are waking up to the fact that they were sold a lie. They were promised strength, independence, and prosperity. What they're getting is insecurity, instability, and a government that seems more interested in culture war gimmicks than actual governance. It's not just about policy failure. It's about betrayal. These voters didn't expect miracles, but they expected their basic needs to be protected. Instead, they're watching as their premiums double, their grocery bills rise, and their leaders shrug and say, "Not our problem." And come 2026, that betrayal is going to have electoral consequences. Because make no mistake, this isn't sustainable. The political pressure is building. Families that used to be comfortable are now cutting corners on food and delaying doctor visits. Communities that once had pride are now turning to charities, churches, and emergency services just to survive. And as costs rise and coverage disappears, people are going to get angry, and they're going to look for someone to blame. That blame is already shifting. Internal polling from Republican districts shows cracks in the MAGA wall. Voters are starting to see that the people they elected to protect them are the same ones throwing them to the wolves. They're realizing that all the flag waving in the world won't pay for a colonoscopy or put groceries on the table. And the more they feel that pain, the more likely they are to demand change. And let's not underestimate the human toll. When healthcare becomes unaffordable, people don't just stay home, they get sicker. They end up in emergency rooms, racking up debt, suffering from complications that could have been prevented with early treatment. And guess who ends up footing the bill when hospitals go bankrupt and local systems collapse? You do. We all do. This isn't just a crisis for the uninsured. It's a crisis for everyone. Local healthcare systems are already stretched thin. When millions lose coverage, the burden shifts to the ER, to underfunded hospitals, to nonprofit clinics that can't keep up. The ripple effects are brutal. Doctors overwhelmed, nurses burned out, critical care delayed, preventable deaths rising. It's not a talking point. It's a national emergency in slow motion. But there's another layer to this crisis: ignorance. Right now, many Americans don't even know the subsidies are expiring. They don't realize what's coming. They're still living under the illusion that their government wouldn't let something this devastating happen without warning. But the warning signs have been there for months. And when the bills hit in January, the shock is going to be seismic. This is what happens when ideological purity trumps common sense. When leaders would rather burn the house down than compromise. When political theater becomes more important than protecting the people who put you in office. And Florida is about to be the case study for what happens when you put loyalty to a brand above loyalty to your constituents. The stakes in the 2026 midterms couldn't be higher. If the GOP continues down this path, dismantling social safety nets, ignoring economic pain, pretending that everything's fine, then they deserve to face a reckoning at the ballot box. Because the people suffering right now aren't lazy. They're not looking for handouts. They're looking for stability, dignity, and leadership. And if they can't get that from Republicans, they'll look somewhere else. What we're seeing is the beginning of a realignment. The old assumptions that red states will always vote red, that economic pain doesn't matter as long as you throw red meat on social issues, are starting to crack. The human cost is becoming too obvious, too widespread, too painful to ignore. And that's a problem no amount of Fox News propaganda can cover up. So the question is, how long until the dam breaks? How long until these communities say enough is enough? The suffering is real, the betrayal is real, and the consequences are coming. Fast. If you're tired of the lies, if you're tired of the cruelty, if you're tired of watching your friends and neighbors get crushed while politicians play games, then speak up. Share this video. Leave a comment. Subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep exposing the truth, and we're not going anywhere, because the fight for real accountability starts here. And we're just getting warmed up. Now let's be crystal clear. This isn't just a Florida problem. It's an American crisis with Florida front and center because of one glaring fact. The state has one of the highest ACA enrollment rates in the country. Over 3 million Floridians rely on these subsidies to afford basic health care. That's not some niche demographic. That's a massive chunk of the population. And most of them live in counties that voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. In fact, some of the highest concentrations of ACA enrollment are in deep red districts, places that were waving MAGA flags and chanting "Drain the Swamp" just a few years ago. But what they didn't realize was that the swamp they were trying to drain was also the system keeping their family insured, keeping their prescriptions affordable, keeping their food on the table. They voted for the guy promising to burn it all down, and now they're staring at the ashes, wondering why their premiums are through the roof and their kids' lunch programs are being slashed. And let's not kid ourselves, this didn't have to happen. Congress had multiple chances to extend the ACA subsidies. Bipartisan support existed. Even some moderate Republicans were on board. But the House, under GOP control, refused to act. Why? Because extending these subsidies would mean admitting that government help can actually work. And that's heresy to the party of small government and billionaire tax cuts. Instead, they clung to this warped belief that if you just let the system collapse, people will be forced to fend for themselves and somehow become stronger. As if skipping chemo builds character. What we're watching is not just incompetence. It's cruelty. It's ideological extremism dressed up as policy. It's the willful destruction of basic supports, not because they don't work, but because they do. And if people realize that the ACA helped them afford a life-saving surgery, or that SNAP kept their family afloat when the rent went up, that's a political threat to the entire conservative playbook. So instead, the GOP buries the truth. They downplay the subsidy expiration. They refuse to fund SNAP. They let the shutdown drag on, and then blame Democrats for not handing over more concessions. All while Floridians and Americans across the country brace for the wave of suffering that's already crashing in. And while this chaos unfolds, Trump, he's out playing golf, holding rallies, posting on social media like a discount dictator. He's not lifting a finger to stop any of it. No plan, no solutions, just grievance, noise, and the same tired lies he's been spewing for years. He's more interested in promising revenge on his political enemies than protecting the people who worshiped him like a savior. And the worst part? His base is still clapping, even as their world crumbles. But the cracks are growing. You can only ignore reality for so long before it kicks your front door in, and it's coming fast. When millions start losing coverage, when those hospital bills start showing up, when food assistance stops hitting the cards, people will get angry. And that anger is political dynamite, because Trump can only distract for so long. Eventually, even the loudest culture war won't drown out the sound of a collapsing bank account. And then what? Then the GOP will have to face the reckoning they built with their own hands. Because this isn't just a political failure. It's a failure of morality, of decency, of leadership. And voters remember when they're hungry. They remember when they're scared. They remember when their kids get sick and there's no help in sight. You don't forget that kind of betrayal. Let's talk numbers. If these subsidies expire and aren't renewed, up to 4 million people could lose their insurance in the next year. That's not speculation. That's the estimate from multiple policy analysts who have tracked ACA enrollment and subsidy usage across the country. And the financial hit won't be evenly spread. It'll hammer the working class, the elderly and middle-income families who make just enough to not qualify for Medicaid, but not nearly enough to pay out of pocket. These are the people caught in the squeeze, the forgotten majority, and many of them, MAGA voters. They were told government was the enemy. They believed that deregulation and tax cuts would fix everything. Now they're being served the bill, and it's brutal. Thousands of dollars in new costs. Premiums spiking overnight. Benefits slashed. Deductibles so high, they might as well not have insurance at all. And those food stamps? If this shutdown drags on any longer, and all signs point to it doing just that, SNAP benefits will dry up in multiple states. Millions will be left with nothing, and the right-wing media won't say a word about it. They'll be too busy talking about Hunter Biden's laptop, or some caravan 2,000 miles away. Anything to avoid talking about why your neighbors can't afford groceries. Because they know what the real story is. The real story is that MAGA policies don't work. They fail over and over again. They hurt the people they pretend to protect. They sell you a fantasy, and when that fantasy collapses, they blame someone else. That's not leadership. That's a con job. Florida voters are about to learn that the hard way. And look, this isn't about gloating. Nobody wants to see people suffer, no matter who they voted for. But what we need is accountability. We need voters to wake up and realize that they've been sold a lie. That Donald Trump and his enablers never had a plan, just slogans. That cutting safety nets doesn't make you free, it makes you vulnerable. That owning the libs doesn't pay for chemotherapy or keep your pantry stocked. And if that awakening comes in the form of backlash at the polls, so be it. The GOP made this bed. Let them lie in it. The 2026 midterms could be a turning point, not just for Democrats, for the country. Because when the cost of food and healthcare becomes unbearable, people don't vote on party lines. They vote on survival. And if the Democratic Party can meet the moment by fighting to restore these subsidies, fully fund food assistance, and make clear who's standing in the way, then we could see a dramatic shift in the political landscape. But the clock is ticking. People are already losing coverage. Food banks are already reporting record demand. Local clinics are being swamped. Nurses and doctors are speaking out. Families are making impossible choices, medicine or rent, groceries or gas. And the pain is only going to get worse unless something changes fast. So here's the message to Florida. You don't have to keep suffering in silence. You don't have to keep voting for people who turn their backs on you the moment they get into office. You can demand better. You can demand that politicians stop playing games with your life. You can vote for leadership that sees you not as a pawn, not as a talking point, but as a person who deserves health care, dignity, and basic respect. And to everyone watching this, no matter where you live, no matter how you vote, this is a wake-up call. Because this isn't just about Florida. It's about the country we're becoming. A country where ideology trumps compassion, where cruelty is policy, where the richest nation on earth can't be bothered to make sure its citizens are fed and cared for. That's not just a failure of policy. It's a failure of soul. If you think the storm is only going to blow over Florida, think again. Because the very same voters in states like Texas, Alabama, Georgia, and the Carolinas are standing on the same trapdoor. These aren't blue states crying foul. These are Republican strongholds. States that have been fed a steady diet of anti-government rhetoric. All while quietly depending on that very government to keep their lives afloat. And when those subsidies vanish and that SNAP card stops working, all that talk about self-reliance and bootstraps won't keep the lights on. You can't eat ideology. You can't use patriotism to pay hospital bills. And when those voters realize that the politicians they cheered for are the ones who pulled the rug out from under them, they're going to be furious. But let's zoom back in on Florida. Because what's about to happen there is especially devastating. It's not just that more people are losing coverage. It's that the scale of the crisis is unmatched. Florida has one of the oldest populations in the country. Seniors who are already struggling on fixed incomes are now being told to fork over an extra $20,000 a year just to stay insured. That's not a tough decision. That's an impossible one. You can't budget for that. You can't prepare for that. It's financial obliteration. And the ripple effects? They're already starting. Hospitals in Florida are warning of sharp increases in unpaid medical bills. Clinics are cutting hours. Mental health centers are overwhelmed. And when care dries up, people die. That's not exaggeration. That's what happens when insurance becomes a luxury and food becomes a privilege. And the cruelty of it all? It's preventable. Entirely. All Congress had to do was act. All Republican leaders had to do was listen to their constituents, to policy experts, to the numbers staring them in the face. But instead, they chose political warfare. They chose chaos. They chose to push a shutdown and let key support systems fall apart because it made for a good soundbite on right-wing media. They gambled with people's lives, and now they're praying no one notices the carnage. But people are noticing, and they're getting angrier by the day. Floridians who never thought twice about voting red are watching their healthcare disappear and their grocery budgets collapse, and they're starting to ask real questions. Why did this happen? Who did this to us? And where the hell is the leadership we were promised? That's where the GOP's arrogance comes back to bite them. They assumed their base would never turn on them, that no matter how bad things got, they could just distract with another culture war, another stunt, another boogeyman. But when your kid has a fever and you can't afford the ER visit, that distraction doesn't work. When you're eating one meal a day so your elderly mother can have hers, political theater starts to look like what it is, an insult. This is the GOP's nightmare scenario. Not because Democrats are making some brilliant political move, but because Republicans have sabotaged their own voters and left them holding the bag. It's hard to sell freedom when people are losing their homes because of medical debt. It's hard to sell small government when families are skipping meals while Congress takes recess. And don't think the Democratic base is blind to this either. They see what's happening. They're fired up, organized, and they understand that 2026 might be one of the most important elections in a generation. Because this isn't just a policy debate. It's a battle over the soul of the country. And if the GOP wants to double down on cruelty, if they want to keep playing games while millions suffer, then they better be ready to lose badly. So to every voter who's watching their safety nets unravel, to every Floridian facing impossible choices, don't stay silent. Don't accept this as normal. Raise your voice. Share your story. Vote like your life depends on it. Because for millions, it literally does. Like this video. Share it far and wide. Drop a comment below. We want to hear from you. And subscribe, because we're not stopping until every single person responsible for this disaster is held accountable. You've been lied to long enough. Now it's time to speak truth, loud, clear, and unstoppable.